Sometime in 1967, a Marine stationed in the mountains of Corps noticed a burning sensation deep inside his body. And when the medics finally reached him, they discovered that a leech, a living, blood-feeding parasite, had crawled inside his urethra. Not onto his leg or his arm, but inside him. That Marine had to be emergency airlifted out of the jungle, not because of the Viet Cong, not because of a sniper or a landmine, but because a worm had decided to explore the one place on his body he truly and desperately needed it not to go. That was not a freak occurrence either. Karl Marlantel opened his novel Matterhorn with exactly this scenario, because it had happened to real Marines more than once. And he wanted readers to understand what the jungle did to a human body before anyone even fired a shot. And that still was not close to the worst thing that could happen to you in Vietnam. This is the story of a war where the jungle itself fought alongside the Viet Cong, where disease filled more American hospital beds than enemy bullets ever did, where the ground beneath your boots had been engineered to destroy your feet and your legs and your sanity. The air you breathed delivered malaria, the water you drank delivered parasites, and the trees above you grew so impossibly thick that actual sunlight could not reach the forest floor. You would have needed a flashlight at noon in the tropics just to read your own map. And that is why you, specifically you, the person listening to this right now, would not have lasted a week. The jungle was not what you think it was, because it was not a forest with extra trees. Vietnam's triple canopy jungle stacked 3 separate layers of vegetation on top of each other, like an ecosystem designed to swallow anyone who entered it. The top layer, the emergent canopy, sat at 150 to 250 feet, with scattered giant trees punching up above everything below. Beneath that stretched the main canopy, a continuous, unbroken ceiling of interlocking branches at 100 to 130 feet, roughly 20 feet thick, forming a living roof that sealed off the sky. Down at your level sat the understory, 5 to 20 feet of bamboo, saplings, ferns, and thorned creepers that soldiers called wait-a-minute vines, because they snagged your rucksack, your sleeves, your rifle sling, and your will to keep moving, roughly in that order. 2% of sunlight reached the forest floor. That number deserves a moment. Because 2% means that at ground level, in the middle of a tropical afternoon, you were functionally standing in darkness. Visibility dropped to 10 or 15 feet, which meant the enemy could stand close enough to count the buttons on your fatigue jacket, and you would not see them. Smoke grenades, your primary method for signaling helicopter extraction, could not punch through the canopy above you, and radio signals degraded in the moisture and dense vegetation until they cut out entirely. You could be surrounded by your platoon and still be completely alone in every way that counted. And then the weather piled on, because the jungle was never finished with you. Temperatures regularly pushed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while humidity hovered above 90%. Around Hue, in central Vietnam, its annual rainfall reached up to 157 inches, which for reference is roughly 4 times what Seattle receives. You absorbed all of that while carrying 60 to 100 pounds of equipment through terrain where movement could slow to a few hundred meters per day, not per hour per day. Point men cutting trail at the front of the column collapsed from heat exhaustion every 15 to 30 minutes and had to be rotated constantly, which meant you could crawl faster than this jungle allowed you to walk. The terrain changed depending on where the army sent you, but none of the options were good, and most of them were specifically terrible. The Central Highlands offered a series of plateaus at 1,600 to nearly 5,000 feet of elevation, blanketed in dense tropical forest and elephant grass tall enough to swallow a standing man, which sounds almost manageable until you remember that this is where the Battle of Ia Drang happened in November 1965, and that you shared those cooler plateaus with multiple NVA regiments. The Mekong Delta presented the opposite problem. A flat expanse of 15,600 square miles, sitting mostly under 10 feet above sea level, sliced by more than 3,000 miles of navigable waterways. During monsoon season from July through October, roughly 69% of the delta flooded, which meant your feet stayed submerged in rice paddy water for 48 hours or more at a stretch. Skin broke down, blistered, cracked, swelled, and rotted. And one army surgeon noted this condition, called immersion foot or paddy foot, often accounted for more time lost from combat duty than all other medical causes combined in affected units. Your feet were dissolving, and that counted as a medical situation, not a battlefield injury. The A Shao Valley combined the worst features of every other terrain into one 25-mile-long, 1-mile-wide corridor, flanked by mountains reaching nearly 7,000 feet. Near constant fog and cloud cover meant the air support that was supposed to be America's greatest advantage frequently could not reach you. And by 1967, an estimated 20,000 communist troops occupied the valley with 37mm radar-controlled anti-aircraft guns, underground bunkers, and tunnel systems they had been building since before most American soldiers were born. None of that, though, was what actually put most Americans in the hospital. Not the enemy, not the shrapnel, not the ambushes. The jungle itself handled that. 69% of all hospital admissions among US troops in Vietnam came from disease. As not sick call visits or headache complaints, but actual hospitalizations requiring beds and doctors and recovery time. Battle injuries, meaning getting shot or hit by shrapnel or blown apart by a mine, accounted for roughly 1 in 6 admissions, about 17%. The jungle was 4 times more likely to hospitalize you than the Viet Cong were. Malaria topped the list, with over 40,000 army cases recorded between 1965 and 1970, and another 24,600 among Navy and Marine Corps personnel, producing at least 124 confirmed deaths and burning through more than 200,000 man-days lost every single year. Back in 1965, malaria alone caused as many hospitalizations as combat wounds. The anti-malarial tablets, chloroquine, primaquine, taken weekly, were supposed to offer protection, but the dominant local strain, Plasmodium falciparum, turned out to be drug-resistant, which made the pills functionally decorative. And the statistic that tells you exactly who bore the weight of this was that 58.5% of all Army malaria cases in 1967 hit light weapons infantrymen, MOS 11. Bravo. A group that comprised only 15.3% of total strength. The grunts, the men actually walking through the jungle, attracted the mosquitoes and the consequences in wildly disproportionate numbers. Malaria dominated the headlines, but the supporting cast of tropical disease never let up. Diarrheal illness peaked seasonally at 55,000 to 60,000 man-days lost per year, while skin diseases like jungle rot and tropical ulcers, combining fungal and bacterial infections, consumed 66,000 to 80,000 man-days annually. Viral hepatitis drained another 80,000 to nearly 117,000 man-days, and dengue fever caused between fizzled, and 28% of all cases diagnosed as fever of unknown origin, which ranked as the second most common diagnosis after venereal disease. One thing from the jungle followed you home decades after the war ended. A VA-commissioned study found that 20 to 24% of tested Vietnam veteran blood samples came back positive for liver fluke antibodies, indicating infection by parasites called Opisthochus viverrini that can live inside your bile duct for 20 to 25 years, silently, before causing bile duct cancer. Around 700 veterans have been treated by the VA for that specific cancer. The jungle did not just damage you while you were there. It planted something inside your body and waited a generation to collect. Vietnam's wildlife added another layer of threat that never paused. More than 200 snake species inhabited the country, with approximately 50 to 60 carrying venom. And between 25 and 50 American soldiers suffered bites each year of the war. The bamboo pit viper, bright green and arboreal with hemotoxic venom, earned the nickname two-step snake from soldiers who believed you would die 2 steps after being bitten, which was an exaggeration, though the pain made you sincerely wish it were not. Nocturnal Malayan kraits carried a 60 to 70% untreated mortality rate, while king cobras reached 13 feet in length and delivered the largest venom volume per bite of any snake on Earth, occasionally turning up curled on helicopter seats, in outhouses, and inside base camps. The Viet Cong, showing a creativity that bordered on artistry, hung bamboo pit vipers from tunnel ceilings on contraptions designed to drop them onto the heads of tunnel rats who crawled in after them. Leeches, both land and aquatic varieties, earned the distinction of being called one of the most hated creatures of the entire war, attaching everywhere on the body, while soldiers burned them off with cigarettes or insect repellent. Giant centipedes reached 8 inches, forest scorpions stretched to 12, and weaver ants that soldiers called communist ants nested in overhead trees and unleashed mass swarms whenever their branches shook. Saltwater crocodiles up to 23 feet long patrolled the Mekong Delta waterways, and Indo-Chinese tigers were very much present and very much interested in American soldiers. On December 22, 1968, as a tiger stalked and attacked a reconnaissance team from the 3rd Marine Recon Battalion, south of the DMZ, dragging one Marine by the neck before the team killed it. That same animal had killed another Marine a month earlier, 10 miles away, meaning the tiger had been actively hunting Americans for at least a month, and doing so successfully. The jungle was working to infect you, parasitize you, bite you, eat you, and dissolve your feet all at the same time. But we have not even reached the part where the ground beneath your boots had been specifically engineered to destroy your body. And this is where it gets worse. The Viet Cong turned the earth into a weapons platform, and they built it with bamboo, human waste, and America's own discarded ammunition. Punji sticks, or sharpened bamboo stakes, fire-hardened for durability, and coated in human feces or urine or plant-based poisons, sat in camouflaged pits with stakes angled downward, so that once your leg dropped in, pulling it out drove the stakes deeper. Side-closing variants made extraction impossible without further impalement, and adjacent double pits stood ready to trap anyone who rushed in to help the first victim. What made punji sticks so effective was not their lethality, since they accounted for roughly 2% of non-lethal casualties with 0 recorded deaths, but their psychological destruction. Every single step you took for your entire 12-month tour might be the step that ended normally, and every step was a gamble. And that sustained uncertainty over months did something to a human mind that no bullet could replicate. The tripwire grenade operated on a simple and devastating principle. A grenade with its pin already pulled sat inside an empty sea ration can, the safety lever compressed against the walls of the can, with a thin wire stretched across the trail. Snagging that wire pulled the grenade free, released the lever, and triggered detonation, sometimes with zero delay fuses that allowed no warning interval at all. 71% of all booby traps in Vietnam incorporated a grenade, and this is the number that should change how you think about walking through any jungle. 51.3% of booby traps were detected only by detonation. More than half the time, the explosion itself served as the first and only warning that a trap existed. Visual detection caught 40.9%, and metal detectors, the tool you would assume offered salvation, caught 3.9%, meaning 4 traps out of every 100. Toe poppers represented minimalist killing at its most efficient. A .50 caliber shell casing, packed with gunpowder and scrap metal, sealed with wax, inserted into a short bamboo tube with a nail as the firing pin, all detonated by the weight of a footstep, driving the nail into the primer. 4 components, nearly zero cost, and the result ranged from permanent disability to death. The Viet Cong could build dozens in a single afternoon using materials found in any village. The Bouncing Betty, the M16 APERS mine, launched its body to waist height, between 1 and 5.5 feet, before detonating 680 grams of composition B in a full 360-degree fragmentation pattern with a casualty radius of 27 to 30 meters. These were originally American mines, emplaced by US, South Vietnamese forces, then recovered by the VC from those same minefields and turned against the people who planted them. Military investigators cross-referenced serial numbers on recovered mines and matched them to ordnance America had placed, which meant your own engineering was being used to kill your own soldiers. That supply of raw materials never ran out, either because the United States dropped approximately 7.66 million tons of ordnance on Vietnam, 3.5 times the total dropped by all sides in all theaters of World War II. And researchers described this as providing a virtually inexhaustible supply of materials for Viet Cong bomb makers. They recovered unexploded aerial bombs, modified dud artillery shells, and repurposed discarded sea ration cans and soda cans into trap housings. Your lunch garbage became a weapon aimed at you the following week. Between January 1965 and June 1970, 11% of all U.S. Army deaths and 17% of all wounds came from mines and booby traps. But that overall average conceals the extremes. Inside the Americal Division, the 23rd Infantry Division, in early 1968, over 90% of casualties came from booby traps and mines, meaning 9 out of 10 men who went down never saw a single enemy fighter. Historians have directly linked the psychological pressure generated by those numbers to the breakdown in discipline that produced the My Lai massacre. Beneath all of this, physically beneath the jungle floor itself, ran the Cu Chi tunnel system, stretching over 120 to 155 miles across 3 depth levels, with the deepest reaching 8 to 12 meters underground. The passages measured 0.8 meters high by 0.6 meters wide, and they contained hospitals, kitchens using smokeless stoves that dispersed fumes through underground channels, ammunition dumps, printing facilities, command centers, and sleeping quarters holding up to 10,000 people. The US 25th Infantry Division built its base camp headquarters at Ku Chi, directly on top of the tunnel network, without knowing it existed. Roughly 100 tunnel rats operated across the entire theater at any given time, all of them volunteers, standing under 5'5", armed with a .45 caliber pistol and a flashlight, crawling into passages where booby traps, tethered venomous snakes, scorpions, flooding, and enemy fighters crouched in darkness with knives all waited for them. The casualty rate ran to approximately 33%, and Harold Roper was a tunnel rat in 1966, put it plainly. I felt more fear that I've ever come close to feeling before or since. Of the 16,000 people who lived inside those tunnels during the war, only 6,000 survived. Because the jungle collected from everyone. Surviving the environment and the traps still was not your whole job. Because you also had to move, eat, and function as a soldier, while the jungle dismantled your body and your mind hour by hour. An average infantry soldier hauled between 60 and 100 pounds of gear, with the M16 rifle loaded at 7.5 pounds, 15 or more loaded magazines at 14 pounds, 200 rounds of M60 ammunition carried for the machine gunner at 13 pounds, plus grenades, claymore mines, machete, entrenching tool, poncho, steel helmet, 3 to 4 days of sea rations, and 6 canteens of water that alone weighed 12 pounds. Radio operators added the PRC-25 and its batteries, another 10 pounds, while anyone carrying the M60 shouldered 23 pounds in the weapon itself before loading a single round. Tim O'Brien, who served with the Americal Division, described the weight better than anyone has managed since. They carried the land itself, Vietnam, the place, the soil, a powdery orange-red dust that covered their boots and fatigues and faces. They carried the sky, the whole atmosphere. They carried it, the humidity, the monsoons, the stink of fungus and decay, all of it. They carried gravity. All of that weight moved through triple canopy jungle in 100-degree heat at humidity above 90%, on 2 to 4 hours of sleep per night, with guard duty demanding 50% alert at all times. For 2 hours on and 2 hours off every night without exception. Night ambush patrols went out roughly 2 nights out of every 3. Staying alive required 6 to 8 quarts of water daily, but the purification tablets, halazone or iodine, gave the water a chemical taste so foul it routinely caused diarrhea. And that is why you also took Lomotil tablets 4 times daily to control the side effects of the thing keeping you hydrated. You were medicating the consequences of drinking water in a jungle, while carrying 100 pounds of gear through vegetation that blocked the sun. Sea rations provided roughly 1,200 calories per meal across 12 menu varieties, and the most prized items were peaches and pound cake, while the most despised was ham and lima beans, which every soldier called ham and motherfuckers, and which Marines considered so unlucky they refused to say its actual name. Heating your food meant burning pea-sized pieces of C4 plastic explosive beneath punctured cans, since it burned with clean, intense heat and posed no danger without a detonator, making military-grade explosive a standard cooking fuel, which is the kind of sentence that can only exist inside this particular war. The DROS system, date eligible for return from overseas, governed your entire existence with its fixed departure dates of 12 months for Army and Air Force and 13 months for Marines. Soldiers built elaborate countdown calendars, often drawing outlines of female figures with numbered segments they colored in daily. And when the count dropped to 99 days, a status called double-digit midget, extreme risk aversion set in. But the deeper problem with DEROS was structural, because it replaced soldiers individually rather than as units, which meant new men arrived constantly, while experienced men left constantly, destroying unit cohesion by design. New arrivals earned the label FENG, an acronym not fit for polite company, and veterans deliberately refused to learn their names. Marine Corps data explains the cold logic behind that refusal. 59.9% of all casualties fell on personnel with 1 year or less of total service, which meant caring about a new replacement was grief you could see coming from the day he arrived. John Paul Vann, one of the war's most controversial American advisors, compressed the systemic failure into a sentence that outlasted every policy paper ever written about Vietnam. The United States has not been in Vietnam for 9 years, but for 1 year 9 times. The battles themselves demonstrated the jungle's dominance over American firepower with a consistency that bordered on cruelty. On November the 17th, 1965, 2 days after the celebrated fight at LZ X-Ray, the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, marched toward LZ Albany, through thick jungle and elephant grass in the Ia Drang Valley, with the battalion strung out over 500 meters in single file. Soldiers who had not slept in 48 hours collapsed where they stopped and fell asleep, and nobody established a security perimeter. And at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, the 66th PAVN Regiment struck in an L-shaped ambush that turned into hand-to-hand fighting within seconds. NVA soldiers appeared everywhere on our right flank, even in the trees. And when it ended, 155 Americans lay dead and 124 wounded out of roughly 375 men, with one company absorbing 93% casualties. Only 84 soldiers walked back to base camp. Brigadier General Richard Knowles held a press conference calling it a meeting engagement rather than an ambush, and reporter Joe Galloway, who flew to the scene, shouted an obscene denial of that characterization. 4 years after Ia Drang, the jungle staged another demonstration of its authority. From May 10th to May 20th, 1969, soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division assaulted Hill 937 in the E Shao Valley, Dong Ap Bia, on the place that would become known as Hamburger Hill. The NVA 29th Regiment held fortified bunker complexes under triple canopy on slopes steeper than 39 degrees, and over 10 days, American forces launched 10 to 12 frontal assaults up that hill. On May 18th, a thunderstorm of exceptional intensity dropped visibility to 0 and halted what had nearly been a successful attack after Company D fought to within 75 meters of the summit, but lost every single officer. After repeated costly assaults, soldiers of Bravo Company refused orders to go up again. Taking the hill on May 20th required 1,000 American and 400 South Vietnamese troops, backed by more than 270 air sorties, 22,000 artillery rounds, over 1,000 tons of bombs, and 142 tons of napalm. 72 Americans died, and 372 suffered wounds, and they held the hill for less than 3 weeks before abandoning it on June 5th. The NVA moved back in within a month. Someone pinned a cardboard sign to a tree reading Hamburger Hill in capital letters with smaller writing underneath asking, "Was it worth it?" Senator Edward Kennedy called it madness from the Senate floor. Major General Zais, the commanding general, offered a response that functions as both a perfect justification for the battle and a perfect condemnation of the entire war in a single breath. The only significance of the hill was the fact that your North Vietnamese were on it. While all of this unfolded, the disease and the traps and the ambushes and the assaults on hills nobody planned to keep, the United States was also poisoning the jungle, and as it turned out, poisoning itself. Operation Ranch Hand, as authorized by President Kennedy on December 4th, 1961, sprayed approximately 19 to 20 million gallons of herbicide across Vietnam, eastern Laos, and parts of Cambodia, with Agent Orange alone accounting for 11 to 12 million gallons applied at a rate of about 3 gallons per acre, which was 13 times the recommended USDA domestic application rate. More than 6,500 spraying missions flew between 1962 and January 7th, 1971, and by the program's end, 12% of the total area of South Vietnam had been sprayed at least once. More than 20% of its forests had received at least one application, and 5 million acres of forest, along with 500,000 acres of cropland, lay damaged or destroyed. Agent Orange contained TCDD dioxin at concentrations of 2 to 3 parts per million, the most toxic dioxin known and classified as a human carcinogen by the EPA, fat-soluble and bioaccumulative and effectively permanent once inside the body. The VA now presumes Agent Orange exposure for all veterans who served in Vietnam between January 9th, 1962 and May 7th, 1975, covering approximately 3 million people, and recognizes more than 18 presumptive diseases linked to exposure, including type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's disease, ischemic heart disease, prostate cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and multiple myeloma. 7 chemical companies, Dow and Monsanto among them, paid $180 million in an out-of-court settlement in 1984, and the 2022 PACT Act expanded the list of recognized conditions even further. Vietnamese government estimates place the number of their own citizens exposed at up to 4 million, or with 3 million suffering illness. TCD, decontamination, still persists in soil and water near former American air bases, Bien Hoa in particular, more than 50 years after the last spray mission flew. The jungle was being killed, the enemy was being poisoned, and the Americans ordering the spraying were poisoning their own troops and their own futures at the same time. The war had found a way to weaponize even the act of destroying the battlefield. All of that brings us back to you and your week. You arrive in country at 22 years old, not 19, because the widely cited average age of 19 is a myth, and the combat area casualty file puts the average age of all 58,148 Americans killed in Vietnam at 23.11 years. 6 months of training prepared you, as most of it focused on conventional warfare, like bayonet drills and marching and rifle marksmanship, with little to nothing about jungle survival or counterinsurgency. You land as an FNG, and nobody learns your name. Your first day begins with 80 pounds of equipment on your back as you walk into triple canopy jungle, where you cannot see more than 15 feet ahead, and your uniform soaks through before you have covered 200 meters in 98-degree heat with humidity above 90%. Leeches find you by the second day. Your feet blister inside boots that have not dried since you put them on. The water you are drinking tastes like iodine tablets, and causes diarrhea. And you have slept less than 3 hours total. Jungle rot starts forming on your lower legs by day 3, while mosquitoes have bitten you dozens or hundreds of times. And your weekly anti-malarial pill may or may not work against the drug-resistant local strain. And your M16 has already begun to rust, and your maps are damp and tearing at the folds. On day 4, your patrol hits a booby-trapped trail, and you face roughly a 50-50 chance of detecting the trap before it detonates, and the man walking point ahead of you did not detect it. 5 days in, and you have moved only a few kilometers through the jungle without seeing a single enemy fighter, but 88% of all engagements in Vietnam were initiated by the Viet Cong, or the NVA, rather than American forces, meaning they decided when to fight and where. Some of them had been fighting in this jungle since the French Indochina War started in 1946, and you arrived last Monday. Tonta VC commander named Ngu Duc Tan assessed the Americans with a directness that needs no elaboration. US troops, not hard to see, not hard to fight. Much noise, much equipment, big columns, nice green uniforms. An American infantryman in Vietnam faced an estimated 240 days of combat per year, while his World War II counterpart experienced roughly 40 across 4 entire years. Some companies spent 35 or more continuous days in the mountains without resupply beyond what helicopters could lower through the canopy, and soldiers went weeks without removing their boots as their uniforms rotted off their bodies. One veteran recalled bathing about once a week. I'd find a stream, put out security, and we would bathe whether we needed it or not. And that exclamation mark at the end carries more meaning than it should. As Marine Lieutenant Philip Caputo described the experience this way: "We fought a formless war against a formless enemy who evaporated like the morning jungle mists, only to materialize in some unexpected place." An unnamed soldier told war correspondent Michael Hare something shorter and more frightening. "Jungle's okay. If you know her, you can live in her real good. If you don't, she'll take you down in an hour." Americans never got the chance to know her, because the individual rotation system guaranteed that. 1 year, and then replaced by someone who knew even less. 2.5 million Americans served in Vietnam, and 58,220 of them never came home. More than 300,000 suffered wounds, 153,000 required hospitalization, and 75,000 were left severely disabled. Tens of thousands more carried diseases, parasites, liver flukes, and dioxin contamination that surfaced years or decades later, long after the welcome home parades that mostly never took place. Tim O'Brien told an interviewer in the 2021, 85% of our casualties came from landmines, which you couldn't shoot back at. So it felt as if the whole country was just killing us. The ground, the trails, the paddy dikes. The whole country was killing them. The ground, the water, the air, the vegetation, the insects, the snakes, the rain, the heat, their own ammunition recovered and repurposed, their own herbicides absorbed through skin and lungs. The jungle collected from everyone who entered it, American and Vietnamese alike. 16,000 people lived inside the Cu Chi tunnels during the war, and only 6,000 walked out alive. The jungle demanded payment from both sides, and the difference was that the Vietnamese had chosen to pay it, had been paying it for decades, while Americans received 12 months and instructions to figure it out on their own. NVA tanks crashed through the gates of Independence Palace in Saigon in April of 1975, 4 years after the last ranch hand spraying mission had flown. But the dioxin remains in the soil at Bien Hoa. The liver flukes remain alive inside veterans who waded through those rivers more than 50 years ago. And in the Cu Chi district, the tunnels remain standing, a tourist attraction now, widened and reinforced for Western visitors because the original passages were too narrow for most Americans to fit through. That, when you think about it, was always the problem.